Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 517, By Brakhage and Anthology Volume 2. Now I talked about Brakhage much earlier when the first batch of his films first came out in 2003. And so therefore that earlier release gets the retronym By Brakhage and Anthology Volume 1. This also is available on Blu-ray as its own spine number. This spine number is unique to the Blu-ray edition. There's not an equivalent for DVD. It's so obviously 518, and that combines both of them into a single package. So the first volume you get 23 films, this one you get 30 films, but this only represents a little more than an eighth of his total output in his lifetime. He is reported to have made about 400 films in varying lengths from about a few seconds to a few hours and everything in between. He was also partly for the high film count is that he loved to do things in series. So there would be a series of films, and then you have like 16 or 20 or however many is attached to it. So I'll briefly recap what I said last time about Brakhage. Stan Brakhage was a filmmaker and considered one of the important American avant-garde filmmakers, and the techniques and traits that he is best well known for are manipulating images through use of superimpositions, multiple exposures, actually scratching on the emulsion and manipulating the emulsion, and even painting on the emulsion to creating an effect and to sort of express the unexpressible. And that is something about Brakhage. It's not that he was doing all these things just for the sake of doing it. It was maybe that was initially the case, or just to try it out, but I think he was also working out and continually working out a style and a means of expression to be able to express the inexpressible. Because let's face it, narrative cinema you can only do so much with it. I mean, and ultimately what you essentially do with it is you tell stories. Sometimes what you need to say doesn't involve a story, or doesn't have to involve a story. It can involve some other things as well. So yeah, that's basically what I said about Brakhage, and that a lot of his films are evocative of poetry. He himself was inspired by poetry. He was informed by a lot of poetry, and this translates into his cinema. I thought I was in dealing with this because I didn't want to sound like I'm just repeating myself. I thought that maybe this could be a way of describing the sort of history of his style, because usually most of the time directors have an evolution to their work. You know, they start off doing one set of films or doing things in one way, but then they discover over the course of making several films that, maybe I should do this, and they start developing their own style and technique. This is really not the case with Brakhage. Pretty much from the word go, he was always going to do something a little bit different. The closest you get to anything like a narrative film is actually in the first volume. Detest film is the closest you're going to get to something resembling a narrative. But pretty much everything from that, and this was, I think it was made in 1953, I think, and actually this is a 50-year career. So It's about essentially about 50 years of abstract and more abstract, and yeah, pretty much from the word go, he was going to do something. He was going to do something unconventional and different, partly because of the means he had, and also partly because of what he was interested in. I don't think he was necessarily interested in working on Hollywood films. He was just interested in more the medium itself, and this is why he's really worth looking at. And so it's just that he discovered new things. He tried other things. He went through phases. There was a phase where he would shoot in using 8mm film, and then he would go back to 16, and it was just a combination of what he was interested in and what he was able to do. His life was a mild adventure. Going through various cities, eventually settling I believe starting in the late '60s, settling in Colorado, trying to live a mountain farm life with the family and not a whole lot of income, and just trying to do that and also trying to do this. And so it's just all of these things inform a lot of his films. And then there would be certain points where he would go back to certain things. He would try one thing for a while and then move on to something else and then move back. And so the point is, it's really, really hard to sum up Brakhage in any decent way. In fact, with Volume 2, well, the first volume was sort of like an introduction to Brakhage. If you have no idea who Brakhage was, it was a pretty good first crack at what he was all about. So you had Dog Star Man in there, which was one of his major works. Again, the guy made 400 films. But anyway, and so this is all tip of the iceberg. So you had Dog Star Man in there. You have some films that from the early part of his filmmaking. And then highlights of the 70s and the 80s, and also into a window of what he did much later in his life, with like the hand-painted films and so forth. So it was like a good introduction, and then so Volume 2, and this is why I went. I was really looking forward to this when I heard that there was a possibility that there would be a second anthology released. I was like, oh, I'm really excited about this. And so this takes it a little bit further. One of the major films you get in here is 23rd Psalm Branch, which is basically his meditation on violence. There's another film that also deals with a similar subject called Murder Psalm, and it is comprised mostly of found footage that is just edited together in his particular way. That's the other attribute of Brakhage, is a lot of fast cuts, and all done to elicit a rhythm, and it's letting the image speak for itself. He was often very hesitant of using music in conjunction with his films, which is interesting because other artists have actually performed on top of Brakhage films. One example was after Stan Brakhage had died in 2003, there was a tribute concert at the I believe it's called the Anthology Archives, the Anthology Film Archives in New York, one of the important centers for experimental and avant-garde film, and it was Sonic Youth who did the performing, they performed on top of their films. They later self-release that recording through their own label, SYR6. The title of it is in Lithuanian because of Jonas Merkas. Hopefully I got the name right. Anyways, so yeah, other people have performed music on top of that. And actually his rationale is, I can understand it. given having some personal experience with it as well, that the reason why he didn't like music is that he wanted the image to speak for itself, and that he found that the rhythms in the music take over the rhythms in the image. You end up being fixated more on the sound than you do on the image. And that makes a lot of sense. And there are several filmmakers who have noted that sound is a crucial part of the cinema. Most famously, Robert Bresson. Which is funny because when you look at the history of film theory, when sound was first introduced in films, there were plenty of people who helped develop film theory say that is the worst thing that you could do to cinema, because it, in their minds, by introducing sound, that means you are making the films more realistic, whereas they thought that cinema has the potential and the possibilities to do much more, to go beyond reality, to transcend and all that highfalutin stuff. So anyways, so Volume 2, okay, back to Volume 2. Volume 2 takes it and makes it a little bit further. And also this organize, the films are organized into programs. And it's because the total, I mean, if you were to watch all the films back to back, it's about 455 minutes. And so I was like, okay, where do I start? How do I do this? And so for this presentation, there were 6 programs that were divided. And I'm not entirely sure I think maybe part of it was to try to group some, I think there was a combination of chronology and type, because I think the first program was where the images are more clear. You can actually see what's going on, and then another program is where he goes kind of all out, and it becomes not particularly recognizable due to either because it's multiple exposures or you have other things going on there as well that's not easily describable. So I'm not entirely sure, and to be honest, I haven't dove into this set more fully, which actually gets into, this is like my last chance to talk about Brakhage. If you do take on Brakhage, I would approach Brakhage the same way you would approach poetry, where it's very much at your own pace. I mean, if you want to dive in and do kind of a binge viewing, likewise a binge reading of poems, you could do that, but I think this is one of those cases where it should be almost savored like fudge. You don't eat the whole box on the first day. You eat it one at a time. Yes, I know some chocoholics who will object to this, but seriously, your health will your health will thank you in the end. But anyway, so you should approach it like a poem, where you take the poem at face value. You take in what the language has to say, or in this case, what the images have to say, how it's constructed, how it's put together, and really just kind of see it and experience it for yourself. Then, if you want, read any and all background information, because there's a lot of notes, and it is very helpful to have the notes to give you some idea of the context behind it, what Brakhage himself has said, because he definitely had things to say about the films, which one could argue it makes him a lousy filmmaker. If you have to have explanations of what you're doing, then maybe you should just be a writer. I think it's warranted because one, there was a thought process to this, and two, it was unusual. And you have to, just like in the early days of cinema where you had an interlocutor explaining the actions, because the language of cinema had not, people were used to it because it was new. And so the interlocutor had to fill in and help, in a sense, help train the viewer how to see a sequence of images and how it tells a story. So, and then now it's gotten to the point where we don't use interlocutors except for a certain artistic effect. See Brand Upon the Brain for this. Because cinema is so prevalent, and we see enough films to know the language, so we don't need narrative cinema explained to us. Experimental cinema does need some initial exploration. If more people did stuff like Brakhage, then yeah, we would get to the point where it just is like, yeah, this is all unnecessary. But I think for this case, it is necessary. But at the same time, it's also, in the end, pretty optional. I mean, you could do it to kind of get some sense of, okay, this is what is said. For instance, there's a film on there called Star Garden, and it's mostly these shots of rooms that are shot in sunlight, but there's a lot of color manipulation. It's not, there's some clear shots, but there's also some the colors are inverse, and again there's multiple exposures and such, and the point of it, or what the drive for Brakhage to make this, is to draw attention to the source of what is illuminating that room. In other words, focusing on the light, and eventually it gets like more and more abstract, and then so suddenly that becomes the focus of it. Another film he made was called Desert, which interestingly, this came about because he was invited to Riverside, California, and he thought, oh, this is good. I'm gonna go to a desert, and maybe I can make a desert film. And he went there, and he was greatly disappointed by all this. It was not, in so many words, it was not a desert. And so what he did was he made his own, and he did it by shooting his hotel room, but it's so out of focus. He probably had it was so loose in its focus that it made the table and the texture look like a desert, and it's kind of it's just trying stuff using whatever means you have to make something interesting, and then keep doing it. How else are you going to get 400 films without that sense of relentless experimentation? But again, it's not just experimentation for the sake of experimentation. I think it was all done to ultimately express something that is sometimes difficult to express. For instance, the nature of memory and thought process. In fact, there is a film on there called The Process, where you have these shots, and then intersperse are these like quick little bursts of color and flicker of light, and it's supposed to simulate the neural process and the way that you remember and recall things. You recall things in snippets, and then there's little flashes in between. You can't do that with narrative cinema. Although the interesting thing is, and this is I think this is the other reason why I recommend Brakhage, is that sometimes there is a point in a story where you have to get into the indescribable. And so how do you describe the indescribable? And this is where I think Brakhage is a good reference point. Obviously not the only one. There's plenty of other experimental filmmakers, but Brakhage, because he's so prolific, and a lot of what he does is very simple. In terms of execution, it's very easy to do multiple exposure. Well, it's easy to do it with film. Digital is its own affair. But actually, even in digital, you can do layers of films. You can layer films, and you can play with the opacity and the transparency between layers, so you can have those superimpositions. So really, the technique is really, really simple, but it's how you put the images together to create an effect, and it's a way of getting into those undescribable moments. I think this is why it was I mentioned this before, the opening title sequence to Seven. It really does, having that look kind of gives you a little window into, into the killer's mindset that's going to drive the whole film and drive the whole story. So, so that is why you pay attention to Brakhage. And again, as I've said numerous times, what I'm always interested in is the possibilities of cinema. I think now there's your catchphrase for me: the possibilities of cinema. That cinema can do more than just tell stories and provide escapism and provide spectacle. That it can convey ideas. It can reflect back at who you are in the hopes of maybe doing something different, and all those things. And so what I'm always interested in is possibilities, and so that's why I like going into experimental filmmakers now and then, because it's a chance to see what is possible. Now, is every experiment going to work? No, but that's why you experiment. You try something and you see if it works, and if it does, you try it again in some other respect, or when you need it. That's why that's why I say that for Brakhage, it was not experimentation for the sake of experimentation. It was experimenting for the sake of expressing something that is often inexpressible, or can be inexpressible, or kind of getting back into basics. In fact, one of the kind of really telling film that's on this collection is Chinese series, and I forget how many films he did, but he spent. One of the things he did is he studied Chinese writing, and this I think this ended up being the last film that he ever made. And the way he made it was that he would scratch onto the film brushstrokes. That's how you would write Chinese characters. And then the way it's played out, it's because the source of this is Chinese writing. It's the takeaway from there is that it's from these sets of lines you then express ideas. So it's almost like going back to the essentials, going back to those basic building blocks, those basic components upon which we build language, and then from language we generate expression. And if that truly is the last set of films that he ever made, that's a very good way to go, and it's a good way to sum up what he was all about and what he was trying to do himself. Again, he's only one man. He hasn't done everything. No one man can do everything. But considering what he has done, he's done quite a bit, and is I would say it's worth checking out. Not that I encourage this, but I do notice that on YouTube you can find films by Brakhage on there, and I would say that if what I said sounds interesting, check them out. Some of them are through the Criterion releases. Others have other sources, because as I said before, as I said the last time I talked about Brakhage wanted his films to be shown communally, and would be happy to make copies of the films for people to show. Of course, he had his specifications and so forth, but nonetheless, he wanted his films to be shown. And this is what made the Criterion releases so special, is that it provided a way to see these films in home viewing. And it was great when they did it in 2003 for the first volume, and it was certainly great when they did it, I think it came out in 2010, yes, when they did it again in 2010, not only for a second batch on DVD, but also having it on Blu-ray. And the Blu-ray looks even more great. Because again, you have more resolution in the image, you're able to retain more information and keep the right amount of grain to show that this is indeed a film. Or but yeah, just explore what's there, and it will give you an idea of what he's about. And like I said, I think the best way to approach Brakhage is as if you're approaching poetry. Just look through a poem. If there's something that strikes you in a particular way, just get into it, absorb it, and see it for yourself. And then, if you wish, read whatever information is surrounding that film, and then you can either accept it or not, and then you just keep going for as long as you wish. So, By Brakhage, again, and until next time, take care.